supplemented by the use of such knowledge, that man will eventually come into the possession of his birthright, and from this general infancy, as Browning puts it, begin the journey from real manhood to perfection. Two conditions at the present time stand squarely in the way of such achievements. First, anarchy and confusion, the result of selfishness in all social relations. This condition can be overcome in but one way, viz., by the recognition of the unqualified brotherhood of man, not as a theory, a religious duty, or a mere matter of sentiment, but as a fact in nature, a universal and divine law, the penalty for the violation of which is precisely the conditions under which humanity now suffers. The second condition, which has given rise to confusion among the workmen in building the social temple and the individual habitation of man, is false ideals, inefficient methods of education, and almost total ignorance of the existence and the nature of the soul. The result of this ignorance may be seen in the fact that not one individual in a million who has both leisure and opportunity makes any real advancement in the evolution of the higher powers, or is even cognizant of the fact that he is a living soul. Old age is filled, not only with infirmities, but with miseries without number. Not one in a million can say with the poet, "'Tis the sunset of life, gives me mystical lore, as coming events cast their shadows before." In the great majority of cases with the aged, death is looked upon with uncertainty or fear, or as a blessed release from suffering and sorrow. Life is thus endured as a necessary evil, and is more often voted by the individual to be a failure than a success. What life ought to be, is often conceived from our many failures. What it might be, is dimly perceived from the intuitions of the soul which the struggles and selfishness of existence have failed to entirely obliterate. These things ought not so to be, nor need they longer be, if earnest men and women would seek diligently, first for the cause of all our ills, and secondly, for a sufficient remedy. This remedy is to be found, first, in knowledge, second, in service of the truth. Let us now examine a little more in detail some of the conditions under which we suffer. The present is proudly designated as the age of science. The art of printing, the power of steam and electricity in applied science, the conservation and correlation of energy, and the theory of evolution in speculative science, with the resulting details, constitute the greater part of our real discoveries. One machine is made to do the work of a score or more of men, while the laborers who have been thus displaced have no adequate share in the profits of mechanical invention. Those who work with their hands are no longer artisans, but generally machines, a necessity as to different details for which no machine has yet been invented. The work of the laboring classes is thus reduced to the routine of drudgery without the hope of advancement, and, therefore, with no other incentive than to keep the wolf from the door. A manufactured article which, when completed, serves more often to foster extravagance and luxury than to supply a necessity, passes through many hands before it is completed. The laborer is glad even thus to serve, because idleness means starvation, and still the army of the unemployed is an ever-increasing host. The occupation of the common laborer is even more precarious than that of the mechanic or the artisan. Is it any wonder, then, that in times of financial uncertainty, when thousands of laborers are out of employment and threatened with starvation, they aggregate all the profits derived from scientific discoveries and from labor-saving machines has to be returned to the criminal or indigent classes. The only thing that we can boast of as a result is an increase in the number of millionaires, and these, as a class, instead of being the fruition of a higher evolution, are almost without exception the very flower of a civilization of competition and selfishness. They have created an aristocracy of wealth, very often by gambling or stealing, and determine the criterion of what is called good society, viz., extravagant display and vulgar pretentiousness. What then is really the matter with our boasted civilization? The answer is ignorance and selfishness. It is the result of the sin of separateness. If in our social and political affairs the foregoing are the results in spite of all scientific progress, and in the face of our boasted Christian civilization, in the intellectual realm, or in educational matters, are we any better off? Let us see. One of the first lessons the child is taught in school is competition. It is instilled into every child at an early age that he should aim to be at the head of his class, and his exertions are continually incited to get ahead of his fellows. Many a young man or young woman graduating from literary institutions and carrying off the prizes for proficiency or scholarship are mental wrecks all the rest of their lives. Nor are the subjects taught, or the branches of learning mastered, such, in a great majority of instances, as are of any great practical value to the student in after life. The amount of technical formation acquired is often useful in the so-called learned professions, but in the ordinary walks of life more often fall into disuse.